Hey there nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and we are back in an episode of Cheap Shots. This is a series that's dedicated to showing you how to save money on the miniatures wargaming hobby. And this is episode number 62, and on this episode we're going to show you guys how to quickly as well as cheaply paint up a Seraphon Old Blood on a Carnosaur. At the same time, this whole entire method, assuming that you're buying everything for the very first time using our very quick and easy Cheapskate method, it's going to cost you a grand total investment of $28.37 to make your Old Blood on Carnosaur look exactly like the one you're seeing here, but this will be the end result for it. And when you compare that for the same items as you buy from Army Painter as well as Citadel, you're talking about a grand total savings of $135.03. So with that being said, folks, let's go and show you guys how to quickly as well as cheaply paint up a Saurus Old Blood on Carnosaur for your games of Warhammer Fantasy or Warhammer Age of Sigmar. Alright, so the very first thing I recommend that you do is you actually create and assemble your Saurus Old Blood as well as your Carnosaur and put them into sub-assemblies. As you can see in this photo, I've basically assembled the rider, made it his own sub-assembly. I've assembled the throne in which he rides upon, left that separated, and of course I also assembled the Carnosaur as well. The reason why you want to do it this way is because it makes it very easy to paint all three distinctive parts of the miniature, and then you can assemble it all together to do your oil wash. Now once you've done your sub-assembly, the next thing I should recommend that you do, of course, is to prime your entire miniature in flat white primer. I use Krylon's flat white primer, cost me $3.99 at my local Walmart. Priming does two things. The first thing it does, it creates an uneven surface for your acrylic paints to adhere to. If you were to paint on bare plastic with your acrylic paint, it would just slip off your miniature. There'd be nothing for it to adhere to. It'd ruin the finish of your miniature. So that's the one reason why you want to use primer. And the second reason why you want to use white primer specifically is because we are doing an oil wash on this miniature, and the oil wash will dull down and as well as darken the colors that we use on this miniature. So by using a white base spray, basically makes your colors more vibrant and also more robust, so that way it survives the oil washing process. So just do a quick once over at your primer and you're ready to move on to your guys' first set of base coats. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do, of course, is start with our very first dark color. But the color we're going to use is Pavement by Apple Barrel Paint. What we're going to do is we're going to pick out the spines along the top of the Carnosaur and along the top of the spine that go down the center of the back. We're going to pick those out in two thin coats of pavement as well as the claws of this creature as well. You're also going to paint the entire throne of which the rider rides upon in this pavement as well. What it does is basically it's a very dark black. It also gives this impression that there's like this kind of multiple striping of color on your Carnosaurs. When you look at reptiles are very rarely one solid color. They're actually kind of like a gradient color, starting with darker colors, gradiently going to lighter colors as well. This kind of helps them blend into the wild in most cases with their surroundings. So this Carnosaur, we're going to do exactly the same thing. We're kind of go with this kind of tiger stripe black look on black with pale flesh, and that's exactly the look we're going for with first. So the first thing I do, of course, is pick up the claws, the talons, as well as the spine on the back, as well as the throne in two thin layers of pavement. Alright, so once you guys have established putting on your base coats, the next thing to do, of course, is to dry brush it. So as you can see here, all we do is just a quick dry brush using Anita's acrylic. We just basically use the standard gray color. It runs you about 65 cents at your local Hobby Lobby. And as you can see in this photo, I just did a quick dry brush on both the throne as well as the spines along the back of the Carnosaur. This basically helps to create some three-dimensionality to your miniature by catching the raised surfaces of the spines of the throne. Basically creates highlights while leaving that darker pavement color in the recesses of your miniature. And one more time, we're also going to do another dry brush on top of the gray using Pale Gray by Folkart. Runs you about 75 cents to your local Hobby Lobby. And once again, just doing exactly the same thing, just putting a very light dry brush along the spines of the Carnosaur as well as on the throne that the character will be riding on, so that way you can create some more additional highlights to add some additional depth to your miniature. So the next thing we need to work on now is the deeper recesses of the miniature. In this case, we're talking about the mouths of the miniature specifically. And the reason why is because both of these guys have snarling expressions. Both the rider as well as the Carnosaur kind of have like the same kind of facial expression. Their jaws are open really wide. Their tongues are sticking out. And that's going to be very, very difficult to paint once we actually start putting on the major base coats for the flesh and everything else. So that's what we're going to focus on first. In this particular stage, you don't need to be particularly neat on this one. You could just be, as long as you got good coverage from the interior of the mouths, you're perfectly fine. In this case, we use Bright Magenta by Apple Barrel Paint. Runs 50 cents at your local Walmart. Just do two thin coats real quick on the inside of the mouth. Make sure you get the tongue, the gums, as well as the cheeks and the openings and the slits along the mouth. Just put two thin coats in that, and then from there you're ready to move on to the teeth. Now for the teeth of both miniatures, what you want to do, of course, is put two thin layers of khaki paint, both on the fangs of the Carnosaurs, the teeth of the Saurus Old Blood riding him, as well as on the tusks, as well as the skulls located on the throne that will go on the direct line to the back of the miniature. All you do is just put two thin coats of khaki paint, and then you're pretty much done on that one. Just make sure you get a good solid base coat, and make sure you pay a little bit more attention on this one, especially for the mouth, to make sure that you don't actually spill some khaki paint onto the gums. And if you do, that's no big deal. Just neaten up with some more bright magenta. Now, once you're done with that step, what we're going to do now is we're going to focus on the individual pieces of the miniature, and the very first thing we're going to start working on is the throne. Alright, so the next thing we're working on now is the throne on the miniature. As you can see, we already got the pretty much the tusks as well as the skulls done on the throne, so that step's already taken care of. And the next thing we do now is take care of the demonic shrunken head that's located on the right-hand side of the throne's head crest there. Basically, what I used was Anita's taupe gray. It's made by Anita's Paint. It costs 65 cents at your local Hobby Lobby. It's a nice kind of off grayish, pale beige color, kind of similar to Rakarth Flesh by Games Workshop, except that it's considerably cheaper. Just put 2 thin layers down on the shrunken head, and then from there we're going to move on to the details. So the next few steps on this one is we're going to focus on the golden metallic elements of the throne. So as you can see here, there's basically that giant plaque that's on the top of the throne, as well as the basically the tusks where they basically get socketed into the throne. We picked those details out in gold, as well as the stirrups for this miniature as well. We picked those out in 2 thin layers of pure gold by Folk Art. You can get this at your local Hobby Lobby. Costs you about 75 cents. It's a beautiful, vibrant gold color. Just put 2 thin layers on that, and the metallics are pretty much done on the throne. So the next few colors will be focusing directly onto the details of this miniature. We just put 2 thin layers of each of the colors. First of all, we work on the straps for the throne. It's going to be attached to the back of the Carnosaur. We pick those out in 2 thin layers of Delta Ceramcoat Tahitian blue. It's a nice pale turquoise color. It's going to go very, really nice with the bindings that we're going to use for the rigging on the Carnosaur. We then also paint the hair of the shrunken head. We use Anita's gray acrylic, just gray paint, just another one that we used earlier before. Put 2 thin layers of that. And then we also picked out the little horns and spines on the shrunken head with 2 layers of Kiwi by Apple Barrel paint, and that also runs you about 55 cents at your local Walmart as well. And believe it or not, once you're done with those details, the throne is pretty much done with, and next we need to work on now is the Saurus Old Blood. Now for the Saurus Old Blood, I'm basically going with the traditional Saurus look for these for the rider as well. So we're going to use Tahitian blue by Delta Ceramcoat, runs to 65 cents at your local Hobby Lobby. We're going to put 2 thin coats of that on the softer scale of the miniature. So these are things like the bottom, the lower jaw, the torso, the legs, the arms, the underneath the tail as well. Put 2 thin layers of that. It's a nice bright turquoise color. It goes very, very well with this paint scheme for the Carnosaur. At the same time, for the harder scales, which are located on the head crest as well as the back of the tail, we're using bright blue by Apple Barrel paint. Runs at 50 cents at your local Walmart. Just put 2 thin layers of that bright, vibrant blue, and then from there you're ready to move on for dry brushing. Now, we're going to do an all-over dry brushing over the entirety of the miniature using Dutch Aqua by Folk Art. Runs at 75 cents at your local Hobby Lobby. All you got to do is a quick dry brushing over the bright turquoise underflesh, as well as the bright blue for the harder scales in the miniature. It catches up on the raised surfaces while leaving those vibrant colors in the recesses and creates some three-dimensionality for your miniature. Now, the next color we're going to use next is Bright Magenta, once again by Apple Barrel Paint. We're going to use this for all the cording on the miniature. Now, this Saurus Old Blood is actually wearing quite a bit of armor on his person, and the way he's keeping this armor located on his body is by using this cording that's along the back of his arms, along the waist, and the back of his neck. So we're going to pick those out in 2 thin layers of Bright Magenta because it contrasts nicely with the dark blue as well as the turquoise that's on this miniature. Just make sure you put 2 thin coats of this stuff. If you do make any mistakes, you can always neaten up with both the Tahitian blue as well as the bright blue that we use for the hard scales as well as the soft scales. So once we're done with that, the next we're working on now are on the fangs as well. Sorry, not the fangs. We're going to work on the claws as well as the spines along the back of this Saurus Old Blood. He's actually have quite a bit of them. They're actually quite pronounced. So because of that, we're going to use 2 thin coats of khaki paint by Apple Barrel. Once again, costing you 50 cents at your local Walmart. Just pick up those spines and claws in 2 thin layers of khaki paint. And once that's dry, we're ready to move on to the metallics. So for the metallics on this guy, we're going to actually use 2 different colors. We're first going to start off with pure gold by Apple Barrel by Folk Art. Runs at 75 cents to local Hobby Lobby. What we're going to do is we're actually going to cover the entire miniature's armor in gold. And the reason why is because if you notice, the actual miniature actually has this beautiful kind of crescent bladed look design motif going on in all the armor. So to make this guy just stand out just a little bit more because of the amount of armor he's wearing, we're going to do a 2-tone paint job on his armor. So the first thing we're going to do is put 2 thin layers of pure gold over all the metal parts of the miniature. Now once that is dried, what we're going to do next, we're also going to start putting on silver now. Now the gunmetal silver will be put on the armor plates. If you notice where that little crescent look motif is going on with the armor, we're just going to do the recesses of the miniature and put 2 thin layers of gunmetal gray all over those armor panels to create this 2-tone armored look. Now if you do make any mistakes on the stage, you can of course neaten up with pure gold. That's not the end of the world, okay? So these are things like the crest that we're going to put the silver on that. We're also going to put on the blade of his spear as well. And then what we're also going to do as well is put the silver on the claws, on the actual talon portion of the mechanical arm that he has on the left-hand side as well. And put 2 thin layers of that gunmetal gray color. What it does, it creates this nice kind of contrasting look between the silver as well as the gold of the armor, as well as the weaponry that this character is carrying as well. Don't forget to hit the stirrups and the feet of the miniature as well as the bits of armor that are looking on that head crest on the miniature as well. We picked those details out in gold. And once you're done with the metallics, the last thing you do, of course, is just pick up the detailed portions of the miniature. We're going to be focusing primarily on the glaive, the weapon that he's carrying, as well as on the claw of the metallic arm that he has. I picked out those details in kiwi. Basically, I just want to create this kind of glowing, ethereal green look on the miniature, so I put a little dot of kiwi on the knuckles of the claws, as well as a gem that's located in the elbow region of the mechanical arm. On the glaive itself, there's actually little orbs of, looks like jewelry on the blade itself, as well as on the hilt of the blade. So because I just picked those out, 2 thin layers of kiwi paint as well. And once you're done with that, you're pretty much done with the rider, and we're ready to move on to the Carnosaur. Alright, so for the Carnosaur, this one's actually going to be a little bit different than we usually do. Usually I put only 2 coats of paint on most of my miniatures. This time though, we're actually going to be doing the 3 to 4 range, and I'll explain why we're doing that here in a second. So the first thing you want to do, of course, for your miniature is to paint the softer flesh of the miniature first. We're going to use Taupe Gray by Apple Barrel Paint. It's very similar to Ruckhearth Flesh from Games Workshop, except it's considerably cheaper because only 65 cents as opposed to 4.55. We're going to paint the entire underbelly of the Carnosaur with this color as well. We don't need to be particularly neat at this point. Just make sure you get good solid coat along the fingers, the toes, the underbelly, the bottom of the tail, the lower jaw. Make sure you put 2 thin coats of that stuff on there and just do a really good, excellent job of the coverage. Make sure you take a little bit of pay attention to the talons, that way you don't make up any mistakes on the talons that you painted earlier. Now this is where we get to the complication, the little bit of the more complicated part of the paint job. Now if you notice, this has a lot of red on the miniature. I was trying to go for like this bright, vibrant blood red with the pale flesh look, make it very vibrant and contrasting. Now usually with what comes to Nita's True Red paint, which you can get your local Hobby Lobby for about 65 cents, while it's a very beautiful red color, the problem though is if you try to do finer details with this paint, it gets a little bit more complicated. So the first thing I did, of course, is I painted 2 coats of this stuff, 3 coats of this stuff rather, along the top scales of the miniature. I wanted to make it a very vibrant, bright red base coat to work off of. Now if you'll notice, I kind of went for this kind of tiger striping look between the red top scales and the softer underbelly of the miniature. I want to make it look like this thing was dripping blood as well as trying to go for. It's called a Carnosaur, right? So you want this thing to be terrifying, and I want to make it look like this thing is like covered in blood kind of. It was what kind of look I was going for. Clearly it's a paint job that if any animal in Lustria was to see this thing, they would want to avoid it at all costs. This is where the 3 to 4 coats kind of come in, because when you have these little individual tiger striping, the taupe gray that we had on the underbelly is going to bleed, is going to show through the red. So you might have to put anywhere between 3 to 4 coats on those individual dripping tiger strikes that you put on your miniature as well. Okay, so in my case it took me 4 coats on some parts only took 3, some only took 2. You just basically got to take a look and see what kind of result you like on your paint job to make that done. But if you look here though, it actually makes this really kind of cool blood dripping effect looking effect on your Carnosaur, and so that's pretty much what I did for that method. Alright, so once you're done with all the red, the next thing you do, of course, is to dry brush that red as well. So in this case, I use Coral Shell by Apple Barrel Paint. It's a very nice kind of pastel orange color. I just did a really quick once over with the dry brushing on the scales of the blood red scales in the miniature as well. As you see, it makes it look really nice. You got that highlighting taking place on the edges and the highlights and the raised surfaces of the scales, while that darker blood red color still remains in the recesses. If you notice, I didn't pick out any of the blood red dripping marks that I made on the miniature going down his torso, just because I want to keep that vibrant red color. Now the next thing you do, of course, is to do exactly the same kind of tiger striping motif from the black of the scales down onto the red. Now I'd use Pavement once again by Apple Barrel Paint, and it took me about 3 to 4 coats on this one as well. And the reason why is because I watered down the pavement paint until it was about the consistency of milk, so that way I can kind of glaze it on top of the red scales. So a little bit of the red is bleeding through on the black, but that's perfectly fine because I'm trying to go with this gradient look on the miniature. Okay, I'm not a painting expert by any means, but that was the closest way I could think of to trying to do this like gradient look between the tiger striping from the black onto the red as well. If you notice, I also did not do any dry brushing on that with that black, and that's because I thought the red was showing through pretty good by itself, and it looks fine. So now that we're done with the flesh of the miniature, next thing to do now work on the finer details. So once again, we're going to use our Pure Gold by Folk Art. We're going to pick out the gold crest that's on the back of the head of the Carnosaur. It's got like kind of like this interwoven kind of metal crown look, so you have to make sure you pay attention between what part are the head crests and which part are actually part of the actual skull of the miniature. Pick those on 2 thin coats of gold. I'll do exactly the same thing with the little plaques that make up the side of the miniature as well. And then also put a single dot of lime sherbet on the eyes of the Carnosaur as well. They're pretty deep recesses, so just put a dot on the entire eye, because once we get done with the oil wash, it's going to look like that eye is glowing, so have this glowing effect to it. And then for the cording that's wrapped around the animal, I picked those out 2 thin layers of Ocean Reef Blue by Delta Ceramcoat. Pick those on 2 thin layers, and the reason why is because the bright, vibrant blue that contrasts very nicely with the red as well as the taupe gray and the black of the miniature. So it's a nice detail that kind of sticks out, but at the same time though, also complements those colors quite nicely. So once you're done with that, the next thing to do, of course, is to assemble your miniature. So glue your miniature directly onto its base. In this case, I'm using a chariot base for this one because I'm using it for Warhammer Fantasy 8th Edition Battle Reports. I then glued the throne into the back of the Carnosaur. I then glued the rider into the throne as well. And once you have those glued together and dried, the next thing you do is, of course, is an oil wash. In this case, we're using Minwax Poly Shades Mission Oak color. It does exactly the same thing as Army Painter Strong Tone. The only difference, though, is this product only costs $6.99, while Army Painter costs $32 per can. So all I need to do, of course, is just do a quick once over with the oil wash all over the entirety of the miniature. And as you can see, that oil wash does seep into the recesses of the miniature. Also kind of blends in the layers of dry brushing that we've done in the miniature as well with the different colors. It also mutes down the colors quite nicely as well. So as you can see, it does a really beautiful job. Now what you need to do is once you get done oil washing this miniature, you have to let it sit and dry for 24 hours. And the reason why is because the stain will act as the wash from the miniature, but it's also polyurethane mixed inside of it as well, which would give it a nice hard coating for your miniature and also protects your paint job. Now the only problem, of course, is you're gonna have this bright candy coated sheen on your miniature once you do this oil wash. If you like that color, that candy coating, you could skip the next step after we get done with the oil wash. But for me though, I don't care for that. I like more of a matte finish, and that takes us to our very next step. So in this case, I use Krylon Matte Varnish. It's a spray I get my local Walmart for $6.99. So I just do a quick once over with that spray to get a matte finish on it. And once you're done with that, the next thing you do is work on the base. Now in this case, I'm going for this Badlands kind of base that I use for my Orcs and Goblins because that's just what the paint job I want to use for this particular miniature. So I paint the base in 2 thin layers of burnt sienna for the top of the base. Once that dries, I then dry brush it with Terracotta by Folk Art. Runs at 75 cents at your local Hobby Lobby. Same thing with the burnt sienna. And once you let that dry, then you just rim the edge of the base in 2 thin coats of terracotta, and your miniature is fully completed. And once again, this is what the final look like. We'll look for your miniature when it's fully painted up this way. So you can see we got a beautiful tabletop standard for your creature. We got the rider, the throne, as well as the Carnosaur down. As you can see, the base is ready to, looks really good on it as well. And this thing is really to bring the pain on the battlefields of the old world, bringing glory to the old ones. So now that we've actually talked about the process of painting this up, let's go and talk about exactly what you'll need to buy from Army Painter as well as Games Workshop in order to paint exactly the same way we did, and talk about those cost savings involved. Alright, so this is what you'll need to buy from Citadel and Army Painter to paint exactly the same way we did, and this is assuming, of course, that you're buying everything for the very first time. And as we're, of course, talking about this, we'll show you the photo of the creature and the miniature from different angles. So first of all, you need a Primer and Corax White Spray, which would cost you $17. For all the parts that are done in black, you'll need to buy a pot of Eschen Gray, which costs you $4.55. For all the parts that you dry brush in gray and in lighter gray, you'll need to buy Slaanesh Gray and Ultramon Gray, which runs you $4.55. For the parts that are done in pink, you'll need to buy a pot of Screamer Pink, which runs you $4.55. For all the parts that are done for the bones and fangs, you'll need to buy Morghast Bone, which is going to give $4.55 for that as well. Now for the pale flesh of the Carnosaur, you'll need to buy a Rakarth Flesh, which is $4.55. For all the gold metallics, you need to buy a Retributor Armor, which is $7.80. And also for the blue of the miniature, you'll need to also buy a Baharoth Blue for $4.55 for the soft underbelly of the Saurus Rider. You'll then also need to buy Moot Green for $4.55 for all the bright green elements of your miniature, as well as Teclis Blue for $4.55 for the bright blue details on the miniature, like the back of the back scales of the rider. Next, you also need to buy Aethermatic Blue, which costs you $7.80 to do the dry brushing of your Saurus Rider. Now, going back to your Carnosaur, you'll need to buy a pot of Mephiston Red for the back scales and for the harder scales of the Carnosaur. Runs at $4.55. You'll need to dry brush it then with Luganeth Orange, which costs you $4.55 for that. And for all the silver elements on the miniature, you'll need to buy a pot of Lead Belcher, runs at $7.80 for that color. Now for the eyes of the miniature, you'll need to buy Cyberite Green, which runs at $4.55 for that. And for the cording along the harness of the Carnosaur, you'll need to buy a pot of Talassar Blue, which also runs at $7.80 for that color. Now, since this is a quick paint method, you'll need to buy a pot of Armor Painter Strong Tone to do your oil wash, which runs at $32 for that. If you want to give a quick matte varnish finish for this miniature, you'll need to buy a can of Munitorium Varnish, runs also $19.50. For the base, you'll need to paint the surface of the base in Dual Brown, which runs at $4.55, and then dry brush it and then rim the base in Squig Orange, runs at $4.55 for that color. And like I said, if you're buying everything from the Citadel and Army Painter method for the very first time, it's going to kind of be a grand total investment of $163.40 in order to paint up this miniature using those materials. Now, when you compare that with the Cheapskate method, which only costs you $28.37, we're talking about a grand total savings of $135.03 being saved. So So there you have it, guys. This is how you guys can quickly as well as cheaply paint a Saurus Old Blood on Carnosaur for your Seraphon armies for Warhammer Age of Sigmar, or Old Blood on a Carnosaur for your games of Warhammer Fantasy. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is valuable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blogger.com for all the latest, greatest hobby news related to this channel. That's good for this one, you guys. I'll catch you guys next one. Peace out and stay classy.